guys, lesson 3.1, ratios and rates. So let's first start with vocabulary. You have 3 new vocabulary words on this lesson. Okay, the first one is a ratio. Now a ratio is a comparison of 2 quantities using division. What that means is you're just taking 2 numbers and comparing them by setting them up by each other. Now if you look, there's 3 different ways you can write a ratio. You can write it using division by setting it up as a fraction. And that's the number one way you're going to set up ratios. But then there's 2 other ways you can set up ratios. You can say 3 to 4 using the word 2, or 3 to 4 using a colon. When you're talking about a ratio, you still read it 3 to 4 over and over and over. So all of these are read 3 to 4. Even the fraction is read 3 to 4. But they're written differently. You can do it with a fraction bar, the word 2, or a colon. Order does matter. If you notice, 3 comes first in all of these and 4 comes last, because the order does matter. Okay? The next vocabulary word is rate. A rate is a ratio of 2 quantities with different units. So a rate is actually much like a ratio, except they're not comparing the same units. If you look on the ratio, they don't put any units. It's just 3 over 4, 3 to 4, 3 to 4, which means they all are using the same units. They're all talking about inches, or hours, or miles, or gallons. So that's why they didn't write the units. With a rate, if you look here, they write the units because they're different. So 60 miles over 2 hours. Those numbers are talking about 2 different things, miles and hours, so that's a rate, okay? Now, there's sometimes, you talk about rates all the time when you're talking about your speed. But when you say, I'm going 30 miles per hour, you're actually not talking about a rate. You're talking about a unit rate. A unit rate is the same thing as a rate, but the denominator is 1. So when you make a 1 on the bottom, that's called a unit rate, because you're talking about 1 unit of that item. Okay? Now, 60 miles over 2 hours is equal to 30 miles over 1 hour. If you notice, they just divided the top and the bottom by 2. But this one is a rate because it's comparing 2 different units, and there's not a 1 on the bottom. But on this one, there is a 1 on the bottom, so it's a unit rate. 30 miles over 1 hour. Okay? So those are 3 different vocabulary words, and they're similar, but also very different. All right, first example. There are 45 males and 60 females in a subway car. The subway car travels 2.5 miles in 5 minutes. A says find the ratio of males to females. Now notice, if we go back to our definitions, a ratio is comparing 2 quantities in one of these 3 forms, but they have the same units. So if we're comparing males to females, some of you might be like, oh, that's different units. Well, no, because they're both people. So we're just comparing people to people. They just happen to be male and female. So we can set it up. They said specifically males to females. So that's the order they wanted it. Males first and then females. Okay? So they start out by doing that as a fraction. Males on the top, 2 females. Males, 2 females. And they had 45 males, so that one on the top, 60 females, so that one on the bottom, and then it's simplified. Your ratio is always simplified, just like fractions are always simplified. Okay? Now, we could have written this some other ways. We could have written 3 over 4. We also could have written 3 to 4, and we could have written 3 colon 4. Okay? They all are read 3 to 4. All right? So the ratio of males to females is 3/4. Fractions are the number one type of ratio you're going to be using. So you need to be aware of these other two types, but you don't need to always write them unless they ask you to. Okay, they may ask you write this in 3 different forms. So you'll write 3/4, 3/2/4, and 3:4. All right, B. B says find the speed of the subway car. Now the speed is referring to the 2.5 miles in 5 minutes. Okay, so because they have different units, one's miles, one's minutes, we know we're finding a rate. So 2.5 miles in 5 minutes, again, it's a fraction. And so it's 2.5 miles over 5 minutes, and they both can be divided by 5. Now, whenever you're talking about speed, we talk about 60 miles per hour, 35 miles per hour, okay? We always say speed as a unit rate. So anytime you see speed, you should think unit rate and try to get a 1 on the bottom. That's why they divided by 5. Because if we divided the 5 minutes by 5, we'd end up with 1 minute. So that would give us a unit rate. So the speed of the subway car is 1/2 mile every minute, or 1/2 mile per minute. Whenever you talk about speed, we usually use the word per for the number 1. So 1/2 mile per minute, 30 miles per hour. Okay, so that's how we read speed. Okay? Next example. The table shows the amount of money you can raise by walking for a charity. Find your unit rate in dollars per mile. So it tells you dollars is going to go on the top, miles is going to go on the bottom, and it's a unit rate, so we want a 1 on the bottom. Okay? But specifically, we need to use the table. That's going to be something new, so pay attention very carefully. If you look at the table, you see you earn $24 when you go 2 miles. You earn $48 when you go 4 miles. $72 when you go 6 miles. $96 when you go 8 miles. So we're comparing the pattern that we're seeing here, okay? So by using this table, we can find the unit rate. So we're going to put the change in money over the change in distance. And that will allow us to figure out how much do we get per mile, because that's what we wanted to find out, per mile. All right? Now, some of you might even be able to figure that out by looking at here. If you get $24 for 2 miles, then how much do you get for 1 mile? So there are many different ways to do this, but it's going to help you in the future a lot, like in the near future, if you get used to looking at the pattern. So if you notice for dollars, it increases by $24, and the distance increases by 2 miles. So the change in money is every time you look at the table, it changes by $24, and the miles change by 2 miles. Okay? So you set it up, and that is our rate. This right here is our rate, but they asked for unit rate. So you need to get the bottom to become 1, so you divide by 2 and divide by 2. So our unit rate is $12 per mile. Okay? This can be a little tricky. We'll practice this in class tomorrow. But it's very straightforward as long as you just remember change in the first thing over change in the second thing. Okay? All right, last example. The graph shows the distance that sounds travel through water. Find the speed of sound in kilometers per second. Okay, so the first example, we learned it by just information they give us. The second example, we used a table. And the third example, we're using a graph. So if you notice, this whole lesson is about how to find ratios and rates in different ways. So the graph shows the distance that sound travels through water. So we're talking about seconds and kilometers. We want to find kilometers per second. So we're talking about speed, so you should automatically think unit rate. We want a 1 on the bottom. Okay? So we're going to choose a point on the line. They chose the point 2, 3 right here. And this shows you that sound travels 3 kilometers in 2 seconds, because the 3 is your y, which is talking about kilometers, and the 2 is your x, which is talking about seconds. So 3 kilometers in 2 seconds. So now that we have a point, we can find the speed. We can use that information that you just found by picking one point, and we can find the distance over the time, kilometers over the seconds. So it's 3 over 2. Now, again, we need a unit rate, so you need to divide the top and the bottom by 2. And some of you might be like, wait, Mrs. Vincent, you can't have a decimal and a fraction. You're correct, but our final answer is not going to be written as a fraction. It's going to be written, the speed is 1.5 kilometers per second. Okay? So we use a fraction, but our final answer is not a fraction. Okay? All right. That is the final example. This lesson is done. Please, if you need to re-watch parts, go for it. And please let me know if you have any questions.